here's just this photograph of the fender missing. This is on magazine 82, so it's EVA 3. And I'll just go through a couple more. You're going to see damage to this rover when it was unloading. You can see the scratches here that are on it. The seat was damaged in here as well. Here's another shot of the missing fender on the front. They never mentioned that it was missing, but it was part of when they actually dropped the limb. I mean, they didn't just have a hard landing. I mean, this thing came right off the gantry crane and dropped down. The rover got ripped right off the side of the machine, and we've already shown that. Magazine 85 is EVA 1, and it's showing on this one, of course, the fender is quite a bit out of whack, but it's showing you that it's only rear wheel steering that's happening here. And there's a couple other shots here. And then we get to this photograph right here. This little piece of equipment right here. That's the mud flap here at the back. So yep. This is the front left tire, the one with the missing fender. And here's a absolutely brand new rover here with a front fender on it. You can even see all the weld marks in here on this thing. Now the difference between rover set for the moon and a rover that was a trainer, the trainers did not fold. And you will notice the difference on this. The tire size is quite a bit larger, and the fender is very, very close to the wheel here. Okay. I don't see that in any of the other ones on here. And of course, if I pull this picture right up completely, you can see that there's absolutely no tire tracks anywhere in here. In front, behind, anywhere. I mean, this rover was literally set down at the edge of this set. Absolutely brand new rover with the fenders, no damage whatsoever to this machine. You don't see any inflections in the tires, no damage or usable marks on it as well, and not even any dust. And they've driven how far out to the edge of the Hadley Rill at this point? No dust anywhere. I mean, this thing's just set right down on the set for a nice stage shot. And this is the only shot you see with the full fender in place. Every other shot, you can see how damaged these are and how much space there is between the tire and the rim all the time on all of these shots, right? You can see the spacing on the tire, like between there and there, right? Didn't happen. That other single rover was just set there for a photo shoot.
Yeah, because there are no tire tracks.
That's right. And this one's tire tracked and as dirty as hell. And this is in the sequence. This is still magazine 85 of the same rover. And this one's now all of a sudden the tires are dirty. Everything's got dust all over it everywhere, right? Even when you zoom in, you can see the dust. This thing's been well used. Tires are completely dusty. This rover basically hasn't moved because they're out walking around. There's Hadley Rill over here. Now you got a dusty rover and another one that's perfectly clean. And you can see that on this shot here, and we're still in magazine 85 on the same EVA. You can see it's covered in dust, and there's the fender missing again.
And no tire tracks.
Yeah, and again, it's set up with no tire tracks for this thing, but the fender now, right there, is missing. Right? This rover basically hasn't moved. It's sitting on the edge of the rill.
Those tires are so clean, they look like they've been pressure washed.
Yeah, pretty much.
And yet in the photo previous, they're filthy.
A small bit of dirt in the rim.
Yeah, there is a little bit of dirt on here. If you're running around with a rover and it's got all the fenders on it, and then the one fender's missing the whole time, and just one shot in the middle of these photographs, you have a rover with all the fenders, everything perfect, and not a speck of dust on it anywhere. And then you're back to these guys again. And you can see that the fenders are not nearly as close here in the way they're put on there as well, because it is a different rover. Each one, of course, being hand built. And then you come to here. This is the end of EVA 2, and it's the first color photographs they have of it. And you can see the condition that this machine is in, because the wheels are not sitting vertically. They're tilted. Everything's kind of messed up on this thing. The fender is absolutely missing. This one's twisted all to hell. It's not even close to the alignment that they originally had on there. The difference between the design of the trainer rover and the lunar rover, the trainer rover had hydraulically controlled brakes. This one had cable operated brakes, of course, because you can't have hydraulics sitting up on there. like that. But here again, this missing fender is available in just about every shot except that one shot.
And again, no tire tracks.
No tire tracks there as well. Yeah, they're beautifully set on the, like, there's got to be some somewhere, right? There's the full picture of it. And of course, here's the oil leaking out of the harmonic drive.
Oh, there's tire tracks in the back of that, but there's nothing in the front.
Well, they look like they've been raked over a fair bit because there are tire tracks off in the distance, but you should see something more there. But this is oil leaking out and the dirt sticking to it. Just unbelievable. And they have the balls to put these photographs up on the internet.
Yeah, well, every wheel would have that same mud or whatever it is stuck to it if those wheels were leaking, but the rest of them don't. This is the only wheel that has all of that crud inside of it.
Yeah.
All of the wheels basically have the same harmonic drive. They have the electric motor running at 80-to-1 gear reduction on the harmonic drive, and that has to be lubricated.
If it's on the moon, you get outgassing. Any lubricant will disappear.
Well, the seal obviously broke, and they continued to use the same rover through Apollo 16 and 17 because you see the same thing on the same rear tire in all of the different missions, right? Why would you use a damage if you've got that much money? If you're NASA and you got that much money and that many rovers available to you, why wouldn't you just change it up, even to fake it? But this idea that they even had the tools and equipment to do any kind of repair on this machine, which there's none stated. Like, I mean, as they update the files, they keep adding more equipment to the machine. But the fact of the matter is they're repairing the rover between EVA-1 and EVA-2 in Apollo 15, who was on the lunar surface working on this vehicle, because those two guys were in on a rest period, getting something to eat and get a little bit of sleep before they went out on the next EVA. Somebody had to be on the lunar surface or on the stage, or they had to take the machine off of there to fix it. There's no other way about it. And the documents show that.
But they're photographing Hadley Rill with the rover in the same picture, but Hadley Rill is on the east side of the rover. It's the fact that they appear to have driven the rover to the other side of Hadley Rill. And I'm saying that's not possible, because Hadley Rill is continuous from their landing point right down towards St. George Crater and then out to the west from there. Hadley Rill is continuous, so you can't get to the other side of it with the rover. Probably couldn't get to the other side of it with the astronauts either.
There's the corner. The sun here is supposed to be coming from the southeast.
Okay.
And you'll see the shadows are a little bit wrong there because the sun angle in here is almost pointing straight north, because Hadley Rill is almost like when it comes up this way off the corner, it's almost north.
There's St. George Crater.
Yeah. This is St. George Crater here. This is the elbow in Hadley Rill. This is supposed to be 1,200 feet deep here.
Yep.
And this is supposed to be a mile across from here to here, which is approximately what Meteor Crater is. And yet you see the definition of the rocks here when you come along and you're looking at it. Like the one they did at Flagstaff was about 150 feet across and about 60 feet down. And that's basically what you're looking at in this photograph. And this is a back map that is blended into it.
Yeah, that's right.
On their stage. That's exactly what they've done to that. But the sun angle is from the east, just slightly southeast in the documentation. And Hadley Rill comes in from the west, has the elbow in it, and it goes north. Then you see the sun shadow here coming off of here, which is way out of line for what they're supposed to be doing. That's Hadley Rill shooting all the way up here, which is just a little ditch. And when I first looked at that and going, that's Hadley Rill, that's a mile across. And I went, no way.
No way.
Absolutely no way. Here he is with his 500 millimeter camera.
What is that piece of junk over here, but underneath that crosshair?
Underneath here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's just a piece of junk. I'll call it a rock, but it's, you know, God only knows what it actually
Oh, it
is.
looks like a car jack upside down.
Well, it's got a fold in it here, and I've never seen rocks with a fold. It just comes right around in a curl like that. There's always something underneath. But you can see here when you're talking about this highly technical machine, right? Here, of course, the fender's missing again. This is magazine 82 here. So it's EVA 1. And look at the condition of this machine on the first outing. And then when they park it beside the rill, you have that beautiful image with absolutely no damage, no dust, no tire tracks, no nothing, and full fenders, right? But you can see how it's been smashed around. I mean, this fender is bent. This fender's, it's not quite lined up properly either on the thing. It's just unbelievable. And if you see here, it's got an oil leak on the inside of this tire too. It's on the inside on that one. So it wasn't just one tire that was damaged, but both tires were. But these are the nice, beautiful shots that they put up for EVA 1 through there like that. Like I said, the scratches are here, everything else on this machine showing how damaged it was coming down. And if you look in here, there's another piece of equipment that dropped in on a pin here and then actually bolts together up onto this on the frame. And it was part of the tool rack that swung out, opened up. And of course that gets removed and you never ever see that again. Here he is here with it, pulling it apart where it comes off. And here's another shot of it doing the same thing. You don't ever see this piece of equipment. It got damaged as well. There are shots of it. They threw it out on the ground somewhere. This is when they were so-called repairing it. All of these extra tools that are in here that are not part of their kit, just simply not part of their kit. Somebody was working on this. And of course, you can see the tires are damaged here from the impact when it was taken off.
And no tire tracks either side of the wheels, but plenty of footprints, which indicate that there could be tire tracks. In fact, some of those previous pictures you had, the tires are herringbone, but the tracks were square.
Yes, I know. That's because another machine, obviously, like a loader. We did do a video on that as well with the different tire tracks on the stuff. But also what we also came across here, Marcus, is that's the tire that was on the cart in Apollo 14. If you're looking at that, it just looks like an inner tube. That's all it is to it. But it's actually the tire for the cart. And it's an XLT 4x8, got a valve stem, so it's pressurized. They said they were using nitrogen in it. Then it came across down here, tire pressure, 1.5 psia, which was put into it. Then you see this, Goodyear, non-pneumatic XLT tires. See the date on there, just before the 50th anniversary? They're advertising for Apollo 14 that these were non-pneumatic tires.
So why did it have
a valve stem? Why did it have 1.5 psi in it if they're non-pneumatic tires? This is where people that look information up. This is what NASA likes to do to confuse people. This is why people have arguments about it, and that's why they disagree with us. Because this kind of stuff is being put up there just to confuse them. Then here, 2 nitrogen-filled rubber tires. Here's the next one, the XLT tires, right? Which we showed the thing. Designed by Goodyear.
Experimental lunar tires, XLT, yeah.
Exactly. And now we get to the next part, is they put 1.5 psi in on Earth, and then the differential of 14.7 for the lack of atmosphere gives the pressure of the tire on the moon at 16.2 psi. That's how it's going to be designed. So if you take the same documentation that they're stating here, if you put 3.7 in a spacesuit plus the 14.7, it doesn't matter whether they claim they've got an inner liner or how they're inflating this thing, that pressure is going to be there. And if you realize that a basketball at 8 psi has a nice little ring to it when you bounce it on the ground and you can't squeeze it shut, that suit, your arms are going to be straight out, your legs are going to be straight out, you're not going to be able to move, you won't be able to squeeze your fingers together, because if you can't squeeze a basketball flat with your hand with 8 psi in it, you're not going to put it in when it's got over 18 psi in it.
Well, maybe they used the same type of, rubber that they did on the tire here. It says right here, it says that they used synthetic rubber.
Yeah, well, that's to improve the gas retention. But When you have something that this says they put 1.5 psi in it, it's the equivalent of 16.2 psi on the moon as far as pressure. And if you can't squeeze a basketball with 8 psi in it flat with your hand, you're not going to do it when there's 18 psi in your spacesuit, because it's got 3.7 plus the 14.7. And of course, we know that there's even more than that, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to explode a pop can in a vacuum chamber. But if we go with their numbers, stating that that's all the differential is, that's the maximum you can have, is that 14.7 psi differential plus the pressure that's in the suit. If you just go with that, you still can't operate it inside of the spacesuits. I also grabbed this particular piece of information down here because it's showing the stowed items that were in the MET cart. So you have 3 magazines for the 60mm DAC camera. This is stowed on the cart. So you have 1 70mm Hasselblad, 3 magazines plus 1 in the camera were on that cart. And I don't know where this camera came from, because if the cart has a camera and each of the astronauts have a camera, that means they had 3 cameras with them.
That's right, yep.
So where are these 4 magazines? So the cart had a camera, the 2 astronauts have a camera on their chest, and there's 4 magazines here. Now, were they using them on their chest-mounted cameras? So where are the images from this Hasselblad camera?
How many images do we actually see of the photos that are taken from the MET cart? Where are the ones like the camera? Because the MET cart, the camera's mounted right up by the astronaut.
I haven't actually looked at the videos off the 16mm for the MET. But you see, you have this other stuff here. You have this, I don't know what this camera assembly is here. I guess it's to mount it. Then you have a magazine assembly that's on this cart. And then you have a magazine assembly cover. Then you have the close-up stereo camera, which were the Nikon cameras that were put on there. But when you come down and you start looking at all of this, everything they have here on this cart has to do with photography. It has nothing to do with it like, oh, well, we threw a couple of bags in there, we threw whatever in, right? Threw the gnome in and the color chart map. But everything about this is photography. Your tripod sensor, cable reel, all of the stuff to hook up the camera with and all of that stuff. But that's what you've got. Nowhere do you have these magazines. There's no place where I've seen these magazines. The only magazines we hear from came from the cameras that were mounted on their chest.
Yep.
This is an interior shot of the tire itself on the inflation on the thing. But I just threw a couple of those things in to show what was on the MET, the wheels and everything else. But you see the dispute that people get into when you have a conflict in documentation put up by NASA, and it's done deliberately, and they continue to update their files all the time. I was watching a video the other day, and the guy simply said, oh, the spacesuits haven't changed a single bit in the last 40 plus years. They're exactly the same suits. Well, how come they don't work, that they have to build new ones? If these ones work so well for 40 years, why are they trying to reinvent them? And how come they're not working?
Didn't work in the first place, did they?
That's exactly right. And of course, what they have on display simply doesn't work. I mean, Neil Armstrong's spacesuit is 2 inches short of zipping all the way up.
Yeah.
The ring connector for the helmet itself connects to the outer white part of the suit, and they claim there's an inner liner there. Well, that's not going to work if there's an inner liner, because the helmet has to connect to the pressurized part of the suit. All of those things. And then, of course, the zippers all over the place. I mean, just ridiculous.
Yeah.
The one thing about that website is the fact that the images are incredible. The documentation that you see in those, the interviews of the people that are in there that we've never seen before. I mean, they even had the guy that designed the flag. Well, why is the official story is we almost forgot the flag and we ran down to the corner store to get one, when this guy designed the pole and how to set it up, how to put it in the container and everything else, and design the pole. And he said the top rod was a little too short, and he said that's why the flag looks like it's waving, because the pole doesn't go all the way out to the end of the flag. And of course that had to be stitched in and stuff. That website is putting these documents up that are only a couple of weeks old. This is more than 50 years later, and it's like it's the latest event that has happened on this planet, the way they're presenting these things. But the one thing I did get from the one on the Saturn V rocket, one that they were doing, is when we get to Apollo 7. Apollo 7 apparently spent 11 days in space in low Earth orbit, practicing docking and undocking maneuvers with 3 people on board. That means the total weight of this craft had to be there because they had to have the life support systems, everything else on board, the LAM, the full CSM, everything else, to low Earth orbit. But Apollo 7 was launched with 1B engines, not F1 engines. Stated quite clearly. Now, they're only 10% of the thrust of an F1 engine. How did they get to orbit?
Magic.
Because everybody says, oh, you got to have an F1 engine to get to the moon. No, it isn't. An F1 engine gets you 2 minutes and 42 seconds off the surface of the Earth. To get to the moon is in the 3rd stage when they do the translunar injection. That's where that power comes from. So how can 5 1B engines with only 10% of the thrust take the same amount of weight and get it to low Earth orbit? And if they did that in Apollo 7, then they didn't need to have these F1 engines running at 10 times the thrust for those 5 engines to lift the same amount of weight, because they had to lift the same amount of weight. They had to keep those guys alive for 11 days. They're doing docking undocking maneuvers, so they had to have all of the gear, had to be there. The entire kit had to be there.
And the fuel to do it with.
The fuel to do it with.
Yeah.
And with these little tiny engines that they had to go back to again after that, because they went back to 150,000 pounds of thrust instead of 1.5 million pounds of thrust for an F1 engine. So did the F1 engines produce 1.5 million pounds? I mean, they can't even do it today. Like Musk, he changed the fuel and everything else, and now he's claiming 500,000 pounds of thrust. So only 1/3 of an F1 engine after 50 years later. But if those 1B engines got that thing to low Earth orbit with the full amount of weight, what did an F1 engine actually produce for thrust? Not a hell of a lot more.
No. Well, it couldn't. It would have burnt itself out, which is the problem it had.
If a 1B engine can take you up for 2 minutes and 40 seconds before the first stage finishes, there's 5 of those against 5 F1 engines are doing exactly the same thing. You're getting to the same height, running the same speed, because you have to be at the same speed to manage the low Earth orbit. What is an F1 engine? Just magic, or is it just nonsense?
It's show. It's propaganda.
Propaganda to show Russia that they had that much more power.
Yeah. Whether it worked or not is another matter.
Well, I mean, they went up successfully. The launches were successful. They didn't blow anything up. They look the same as a 1B engine when they're lifting off, because I watched the Apollo 7 launch. They're just as noisy. They just made this number up and put a different label on it and said it's got this much more power. But it only worked in 1969. It didn't work after that.
You'd think if the F1 engine was so successful, it would have been used on the space shuttle when they were launching that. And there was a lot of trouble getting the space shuttle off the ground. If they'd used the F1 engines, it would have been simple. But no, they had to get a completely new set of engines for the space shuttle.
Plus the solid fuel.
And the solid fuel rockets to give it enough power. And we're seeing it now on Artemis. That's what Artemis is using. Solid fuel boosters and 4 space shuttle engines.
Well, the shuttle was substantially lighter weight.
It was.
Because it didn't have to so-called have all those extra fuel tanks for the other stages that Apollo needed.
Something doesn't add up here, you know.
Like, I wanted to talk to Randy more because he's done such an extensive research on the F1 engines.
Yes, he has.
And how the anomaly of Apollo 7 launch using the 1B engines when they have such little power by comparison, which is well documented. That's the point. It's well documented. That's the one part I got out of the video on it. And then on the second video, where they got all those beautiful, incredible shots of this stuff and the guy actually holding the material up for the hull of the LAM. Well, if that stuff is that thin, how did they weld it together? in that same documentation, they were showing much heavier welds on the tanks that were leaking, and they had to go back and redo them all. But how do you weld stuff that's as thin as a pop can? If you take anybody that works with any vacuum chambers and stuff, anybody can look up the documentation on the thickness of the wall to build your own little vacuum chamber, right? But that's only for small pumps. Like Robert has 2 vacuum pumps. One was designed to go to 10 to the minus 1, and the other one was designed to go to 10 to the minus 3. When he put the wrong lid on the one, it broke the lid. Because they are specified, the wall thickness is specified for the amount of vacuum you're pulling. If you look it up for just small chambers like that for household type or use or whatever like that, the wall thickness is 1/100th of the diameter. So if you had something that's 100 inches across, you got 1 inch on there. But when you get to the Sandusky chamber, the wall thickness is 1:15 ratio of the diameter. Like it's got 10-foot walls and it's 150 feet across in diameter. That's a 1:15 ratio. And that's only to get to 10 to the minus 6. Now you take the lemon, you go out there and you put stuff in a pop can size, no thicker than the thickness of a pop can, and that cylinder, basically the top part of the lem inside. I mean, everybody looks at all of the foil and everything else and the shielding that they so-called put up, and they think that's part of the structure. It's not. Basically, the lem was an 8-foot cylinder that was in there, but it's only got the thickness of a pop can on there. And now you're dealing with 10 to the minus 11. How do you weld this stuff? And if they sit there and say it's titanium, they're right off their tree, because they didn't even learn how to weld titanium until 1974. It's a very unusual material to weld to start with. But if you take even anybody that knows how to weld anything, the best welders are not welding a pop can together. Pop cans are made by compression seals and everything else and stuff like that when they put them together. But you couldn't weld an 8-foot diameter stuff in with any kind of welding material. It's just going to burn right through it. The welds are going to be so thin because they would have to be finished as thin as the material itself. They're going to leak. They were having problems with their welds on their oxygen tanks and everything else and their fuel tanks, documented in that. And those are very thick pieces of steel that they were welding. They should have been able to seal them up.
This is interesting.
What do you got on the ground there?
This reticle here. I mean, look at that nice brick here, nice and square, and I don't know, you know.
Oh, there's lots of those around on movie sets.
Yeah, even look at this. I mean, this isn't even right here, you know.
Oh, there's nothing right anywhere in those.
There's nothing right about this. And then you look at this. Look at how square these pieces are here. I mean, there's something definitely wrong here. This is not on the moon. Look at that.
None of it's on the moon. No photographs were taken on the moon, as you demonstrated very clearly by putting a roll of film into a vacuum chamber and getting it as high as you can. The film was wrecked. So any photograph allegedly showing something on the moon is fake, whether it's an astronaut or a rover or a flag.
They don't stop, do they?
No, they don't. I mean, there's more and more films coming out now from various different people uncritically praising NASA and saying this is what they did. They don't prove it, they just say it. They're just repeating what NASA are putting out as propaganda for their Apollo program. The problem that NASA have now got is that they're going to have to repeat it, assuming they did in the first place. They're going to have to repeat it with Artemis and real astronauts with Artemis. Now, if those astronauts are starting to ask questions and saying, well, what's the protection we're going to get going through the radiation belts? And what's the protection against the radiation when we get to the moon? And if they don't get good answers, because astronauts are pretty intelligent people, they have to be to become an astronaut. They have to know their science and they have to know their mathematics and their physics. And if they say, well, tell me about the protection you're going to offer us in the Artemis craft and in our spacesuits when we get to the moon, because we know there's radiation there. And if NASA can't come up with a good answer other than saying, well, it worked well on Apollo, didn't it? And they'll say, well, that was 50 years ago. So where are your readings? Where's all your evidence that the levels of radiation on the moon can protect humans?
The problem is right now we've got a very active sun. We got a lot of CMEs, and people are trying to discount that. You don't hear any conversation from NASA about the effects of the radiation coming off the sun at this moment.
So where are your readings? Where's all your evidence? Evidence.